Hi, everybody, and welcome to a discussion of Chinua Achebe's Chica's School Days. So I know that you have read about Achebe and you have read the story itself, but there were a couple of things that I thought might be interesting to augment. One of them is that Achebe only died in 2013 in March, and he was a professor at Brown University here in the United States. Things that I think are interesting is that Achebe's rewriting of Heart of Darkness, which was, I think it was called, criminy sakes, what was that called? Um, Things Fall Apart. Yes, wow, I'm falling apart. Um, anyway, that his critique of Heart of Darkness is one of the reasons why it isn't taught as often anymore because Achebe said, hey, this is really actually quite racist in nature, so you probably should not be teaching it. Okay, so there were a few things, there were 4 points that I wanted to make in regards to Achebe and school days. The first one is that Achebe believes that Africans with a colonial education, like Chika, are in need of fiction for cultural re-education. So he often wrote about education in both his fiction and his nonfiction. Um, what is the nature of Chika's education? The narrator says he developed a strong hatred for arithmetic. He loved stories and songs, and he liked particularly the sound of English words, even when they conveyed no meaning at all. That's on page 830. Can obsessing about words such as periwinkle and constellation really be considered an education? I think that's a pretty good question. His teacher also shares this obsession. Chika's teacher was fond of long words. His favorite pastime was copying out jaw-breaking words from his Changer's Etymological Dictionary. That's also on 830. Um, is this actually education, or is this just kind of like a fascination? I don't know. It seems to inspire Chika just to kind of babble meaninglessly, though. So when this is contrasted with the diviner's wisdom, the teacher's lessons seem shallow. For instance, on 828, he says, "Those who gather ant-infested faggots must be prepared for the visit of the lizards." So if you don't do your work, things are going to come down on you. And if you kind of sort of skim through things, it'll also come back on you. The diviner tells Chika's grandmother, is what um, is happening on 828. Anyway, so, and I just think that that's a really good warning, not just in the story, but for people who are against the colonization and who want to continue with Igbo culture. As a novelist, Achebe saw himself mostly as an educator for the African colonized people. In his essay, The Novelist as a Teacher, which he wrote in 1965, he concludes, "I would be quite satisfied if my novels did no more than teach readers that the past, with all its imperfections, was not one long night of savagery from which the first Europeans acting on God's behalf delivered them." And I think that we have a tendency to do that here in the United States. We think, oh, anything coming out of Africa must be, and I'm doing air quotes here, primitive. Um, or we tend to think that life in Africa and culture in Africa begins with colonization, and we tend to think of the most civilized countries are also the ones that had been colonized by European people. So if you wanted some further reading on that, you could read Novelist as Teacher. I think it would be a pretty good one. It's only about 6 pages, 7 pages long. So my second point is about Mr. Brown, the English missionary, and I think he has kind of a weird, complicated role in this. He doesn't really seem to have a big role, but he's got this profound effect on the family. So he initiates that chain of events that leads to Chika's colonial non-Igbo education, but he also disregards the Osu caste system. Um, and by the way, that Osu caste system is still alive and well today. Um, this is the same missionary that you'll find in Things Fall Apart. Um, and I think that Mr. Brown is like a prototype of the later and more fuller manifestation in the novel, to the students who have actually read Things Fall Apart. So, despite his smaller role in the story, though, he's still a significant presence because he is the one that kind of sets things in motion. So, Mr. Brown represents the British who have been colonizing Nigeria since, I don't know, I guess the 1870s. With colonization came like this overwhelming number of Igbo conversions to Christianity, which you see in the story. Though students may first read Mr. Brown as a detriment to Igbo culture, they should be considered they should be encouraged to consider him as in a positive light as well. Because I think in America, we think of a caste system as being a very bad thing, and that people should have that sort of social mobility, ideas of equality, of not having a system where you can marry down, but you can't really marry up. And I think that he does kind of go a long ways to break that. So the narrator in the story says that the only person who supported Amos in his mad marriage venture was Mr. Brown, the white missionary. And I think that kind of is where it starts, because the guy was he was Christianized. Chika's mother is an Osu, a member of that, what you would call the untouchable class, which I'm sure that you're familiar with because of our uh, regular dealings with India and Pakistan. Um, those are the Osus are said to be slaves to the deities. So he says, in No Longer at Ease, Achebe says, our fathers in their darkness and ignorance called an innocent man Osu, a thing given to the idols, and thereafter he became an outcast, and his children and his children's children forever. If you're interested, you could probably find No Longer at Ease. It's published by Anchor Books, came out in 1994. My third point is that the use of English language to express the experiences of colonized African people through Chika's careless and kind of, I don't know, silly obsession with English, Periwinkle. I just imagine this kid running around going, Periwinkle, Periwinkle. Uh, I don't know, it just kind of cracks me up. So Achebe actually had a very keen interest in language, if you couldn't tell. Only one sentence after the narrator says that he and the other students were impressed uh, with and never forgot the phrase explosive mechanism. He says, Chika was naturally impressed by the teacher's explosive vocabulary. That's on page 830. The integration of the word explosive in this case seems to imply that Chika, a fellow Igbo, Chika-like character like Achebe himself, is the narrator. So he represents the African who is interested in language. And though he loves the English language, it's the same language that spoke of Africans as barbarians, the type of comments that inspired Achebe to write the African novel Against Heart of Darkness and Joyce Carey's Mr. Johnson. In The African Writer in the English Language, Achebe says, I feel that the English language will be able to carry the weight of my African experience. But it will have to be a new English, still in full communion with its ancestral home, but altered to suit its new African surroundings. I think that's very interesting, to say, I'm going to take the language of the oppressors and make it accommodate my experiences. And I think that that's an amazing thing to do, is to co-opt language, to have it work for you rather than against you, as it probably always has. So I thought that was kind of neat. Achebe's fiction is an example of English reunited to accommodate a bicultural space. Instead of using words ostensibly and without thought, Achebe, who is the grown-up Chika, of course, he learns to control them for his own purpose. That's kind of cool. So the last point that I wanted to talk about is it's kind of, I don't know, the first time I read this, I thought, this is so annoying. It's like a digression into a digression into a digression. The narrator's digressions from the main story kind of force the audience to see how larger social, cultural, and ancestral issues affect individual lives. All right, so we see Chika going to school. It's not really about that, right? I mean, it's all about the things that are going along around this text. The story is initially a succession of digressions about Chika's family and tribe, digressions that seem kind of tangential, to the main subject or the title. The narrator often acknowledges these asides, saying, for example, on page 829, "But we have wandered from our main story." But what is the effect of this? So, one effect of the digressive nature of the text is the echoing of that oral storytelling tradition, which is important to the Igbo culture. So, I don't know if you have ever been part of storytelling culture, but digression is usually the point of the story. And I think that that's neat because that's the way of getting to the point without saying that's the point. It makes for a very interesting listen or an interesting read. So it might feel like the real subject is suspended while they're, going through things like family history, but I think that it really is the point. I mean, it's worth pausing to consider how the background stories, like these big dramatic stories about religious conversion and colonialism and social class and cultural integration and family, actually are the point. I mean, they're about the less dramatic, more quotidian schooling of a young boy because he doesn't just go to school by himself. He goes to school as part of his culture, as a representative of his family, as someone from a tribe, as someone living in post colonial Africa. And I think that that is good to understand. Were the story only about Chica as a student of English, I don't think that we would understand the major and political cultural changes that caused the family's change and his own fascination with the West. So here are a couple of things that I would suggest for you. I know this is getting long, but I appreciate your patience. Um, what you might want to think of is there's a little film called Chinua Achebe, Africa's Voice, and I think you may be able to find it on YouTube. I'll do a little check on that and see if I can find it. If not, it might be on Netflix. And you can talk about Chica's life and experiences and how they reflect Chinua Achebe's himself, because he's a very interesting sort of man. So the next thing that you could do is draw like an outline of the order of events of the story. So draw out that plot line um, and all of the digressions from it, because I think that that's really interesting, and how it moves back and forth in time in a story that is, I mean, sort of about Chica's school days, but not really. So use that timeline to show how that's important. Um, so think about this. As an introduction to the digressive nature of the story, begin with a writing exercise based on this prompt. Ready? Chica probably does not realize the major social, political, cultural, and religious changes that affected his family and consequently led to his English education. So consider your own childhood in your prompt. Can you relate to Chica's situation? Think of the larger social issues that may have affected your family and their decision to send you to a certain school, to play a certain sport, to join a club, to play an instrument, um, and what some of those things at home and in the larger culture influenced you the way that they did. So, um, that might be something that would be fun to take a stab at. So if you are familiar with it, read passage, and even if you aren't, it's in the book. So you can read passages from A Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, um, or you can look at Mr. Johnson by Joyce Carey, um, and that Achebe excerpts in his essay, My Home Under Imperial Fire. For example, you might read the passage from Mr. Johnson. Its people would not know the change if time jumped back 50,000 years. They live like mice or rats in a palace floor. All the magnificence and variety of the arts and ideas and the learning and the battles of civilization go on over their heads, and they do not even imagine them. Um, and that's from Mr. Johnson. It's actually on page 180 or 121. And then discuss how an African writer might write in a language that also captured that idea. It's kind of a hard one. Take it on if you wish. Um, so here's another idea. Tell me what the story is about. Is it just about Chica and his school days? What does the speaker or why does the speaker include the stories of Chica's grandma, father, and his mother who refuses to let him eat, quote unquote heathen food? And are these digressions from the main story about Chica, or are they somehow integral to the story? Um, Next question is, what is the role of language? So think about Chica's obsession with English words and songs, and how he even makes up that little song, right? Um, and then for Chica Achebe's ideas, refer to his 1964 essay, The African Writer and the English Language. Note that he concludes this essay with a quotation from James Baldwin, the author of Notes of a Native Son. Are Baldwin's and Achebe's stories comparable on the issue of language? And for that matter, this is another time when we've brought up James Baldwin. Remember, Leopold Senghor was really an admirer of Baldwin's as well. So you might even want to think about instead comparing Achebe to Senghor. I think that'd be a great idea. Um, so yeah, let's make that your next idea. Why don't you compare the writing of Achebe to that of Leopold Senghor, because they have so many parallels to them. So the next part you might want to, my next question, there's two of them. One would be to examine Chica's school days as a comment on children who grew up in that bicultural type of land. Um, Jamaica Kincaid's Girl, which we're going to read in a couple of weeks, that might be a really good one to compare it to, although it would require you to work ahead. And then the final thing that you might want to do is do some research on the Osu caste system. What is some of the history of the Osu people? Is the caste system still in effect? We know that it is, but why? Is Achebe commenting on the Igbo culture's treatment of the untouchables? Um, or does he condone it? I really don't, I don't know. So if he is, then what is he saying? And if not, then what role does the caste system play in this story? Okay, good luck with that. I'll get this posted. I know, again, it's kind of long, but I know that you can do it. You guys have a great day.